There is a specific kind of silence that settles over a small town after something terrible happens. Not the silence of peace. The silence of people who know each other, who see each other at the gas station and the church parking lot and the high school football game, and who have learned, over many years, to keep certain things unspoken, to look at a particular person and feel something they cannot name and say nothing. For 38 years, the town of Cimarron, New Mexico, held that silence. In the spring of 2024, it finally broke. Della Reyes was 22 years old in the summer of 1986. She had grown up in Cimarron, a small ranching community in Colfax County. Nestled at the foot of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in the northeastern corner of New Mexico. She worked the morning shift at a diner on the main road through town, saved tips in a jar on her windowsill, and had been accepted to a nursing program at New Mexico Highlands University in Las Vegas, about an hour south. She was supposed to start in September. She had already told her mother what color she wanted to paint her dorm room. She was one of those people a small town produces and then quietly takes pride in. The ones who work hard, who are kind without making a performance of it, who seem to carry a particular brightness that everyone around them notices without ever quite saying so out loud. On the evening of July 19, 1986, Della Reyes finished her shift, walked to her car in the diner parking lot, and drove away. She never arrived home. She never arrived at her mother's house for dinner, which had been the plan. Her car was found 2 days later on a dirt road off State Road 21, unlocked, keys still in the ignition. There was no sign of Della. Her mother, Rosaria, filed a missing persons report that same evening. By the end of the week, Colfax County Sheriff's deputies had organized a search of the surrounding terrain. Volunteers from 3 counties came out. They searched the arroyos and the brush and the edges of the cattle ranches that stretched for miles in every direction. They found nothing. The investigation produced one early lead that consumed months of work before collapsing entirely. A man who had been seen near the diner parking lot that afternoon, a transient passing through on a construction job, was interviewed, released, interviewed again, and eventually cleared. The trail went cold with him. By early 1987, Della Reyes was listed as a missing person, and her case had been set aside in the way that underfunded rural sheriff's departments have always had to set cases aside, reluctantly, without resolution, haunted. Her mother lit a candle for her every July 19th. Her younger sister Marisol, who had been 17 at the time of the disappearance, kept a photograph of Della on the mantel in her living room for the next 3.5 decades. A photograph from the summer of 1985. Della is squinting into the sun. She is laughing at something just outside the frame. What investigators did not know in 1986, what they had no way of knowing, was that the answer to what had happened to Della Reyes had been visible to portions of the Cimarron community almost from the beginning. His name was Warren Delk. He was 39 years old in the summer of 1986, a rancher whose family had worked land in Colfax County for 3 generations. He was known in town, known at the diner where Della worked, known at the feed store, at the county fair, at the annual rodeo, known in the way that people who have deep roots in a place are always known, as part of the furniture of a community, unremarkable by virtue of his familiarity. What some people knew, or suspected, or had heard fragments of over the years, was that Warren Delk had a temper, that there had been an incident, years before, involving a woman in a neighboring county that had never resulted in charges, that he had been, in the weeks before Della's disappearance, fixated on her in a way that made at least 2 people uncomfortable enough to mention it to each other. But not to law enforcement, Not in 1986. Not in Colfax County, where the Delk family name meant something, where a rancher's word carried weight, where a young woman from a Mexican-American family on the east side of town might not have been extended the same institutional urgency that another disappearance might have generated. That calculus. Who gets believed? Who gets protected? Whose loss is treated as a priority is not unique to Cimarron in 1986. It is a feature of American law enforcement history that investigators and journalists and advocates have spent decades trying to document and address. It does not make it easier to reckon with when it attaches itself to a specific name, a specific face, a specific jar of tips saved on a windowsill. Warren Delk was never formally interviewed in connection with Della's disappearance. His name did not appear in the original case file. For 38 years, he remained in Cimarron. He sold the ranch in 2001 and moved into a house near the edge of town. He aged. He became an old man. He attended the same church he had always attended. He was seen at the gas station, at the post office, at the high school football game. People who knew what they knew, or suspected what they suspected, saw him there. And they said nothing. In 2021, the New Mexico Department of Public Safety launched a formal cold case review initiative in partnership with the University of New Mexico's Office of the Medical Investigator. Cases across the state were flagged for potential re-examination, with priority given to homicides and disappearances that had generated little forensic evidence at the time of the original investigation, but might benefit from modern analytical techniques. Della Reyes was on the list. A cold case investigator named Sergeant Patricia Oat was assigned to the file in early 2022. She later described what she found inside as thin. Years of accumulated follow-up reports, most of them dead ends. The original interview notes, photographs of the car, and very little else. There had been minimal forensic collection at the scene in 1986. What had been collected? Swabs from the interior of the car, a partial boot print in the dirt near the driver's side door, had been stored. But without chain of custody protocols that would satisfy modern evidentiary standards. The boot print was useless. The swabs were a question mark. Sergeant Oat spent 4 months reading the file before she made a single phone call. Then she started making calls. She spoke to former deputies who had worked the original case. She spoke to people in Cimarron who had known Della. She spoke to Marisol Reyes, who wept through most of their first conversation, but answered every question with precision and clarity, because she had been waiting 38 years for someone to ask. And she began, carefully and methodically, to compile a list of names that had never made it into the original case file. People who had been adjacent to the events of July 1986 and had never been formally interviewed. Warren Delk's name came up in the 3rd month of interviews. Not from one person, from 4, independently, over the course of several weeks. Each of them had held it for decades. Each of them, when pressed gently on why they had never gone to law enforcement with what they knew or suspected, gave some version of the same answer. Because it wouldn't have mattered. Because of who he was. Because of who she was. Because of how things worked. Sergeant Oat requested a subpoena for Warren Delk's Dina. The case that was being built was still circumstantial, a cluster of witness accounts describing behavior and statements from 1986. Nothing physical, nothing that alone would carry a trial. What Sergeant Oat needed was something from the car. The swabs taken from the interior in 1986 had sat in storage for 38 years. She sent them to the state crime lab with a request for touch DNA analysis. It was, she would later say, a long shot. The kind of long shot that cold case investigators learn to treat as standard procedure, because sometimes long shots land. This one landed. The touch DNA extracted from the interior door handle of Della Reyes's car produced a partial male profile. It was uploaded to CODIS. No hit. But it was sufficient for a direct comparison. Delk's DNA, obtained through the subpoena, was submitted. The analysis came back in 6 weeks. It was a match. On March 8, 2024, at approximately 7:45 in the morning, Colfax County Sheriff's deputies and New Mexico State Police arrived at Warren Delk's residence in Cimarron. He was 76 years old. He answered the door in a bathrobe. He was handcuffed in his own doorway and placed in the back of a patrol vehicle as neighbors watched from driveways and windows. The arrest made the front page of the Cimarron News and Press. It made local television in Albuquerque and Santa Fe. The headline, which felt inadequate to the thing it was describing, said simply, "Arrest made in 1986 cold case. Cimarron man charged with first-degree murder." The community's reaction was not simple. It rarely is, in a place where everyone knows everyone, where the accused is someone's neighbor, someone's former schoolmate's father, someone people have spent their entire adult lives seeing and speaking to and accepting as a fixture of daily life. There were people in Cimarron who said they were shocked, and there were people who said, quietly to each other, that they were not shocked at all, that they had known, that they had carried it, that they were relieved in a way they hadn't known they were allowed to be. Marisol Reyes was at work when Sergeant Oat called her on the morning of the arrest. She left work immediately and drove to her sister's grave in a small Catholic cemetery on the edge of town, where Della had been memorialized in 1995 after the family made the decision to hold a funeral in absentia. She sat there for a long time. She told a reporter afterward that she had one thought, sitting in that cemetery, that she wished her mother had lived long enough to make this drive. Rosaria Reyes had died in 2011. The candles on the mantel and the photograph in the frame and 38 years of not knowing. Warren Delk entered a not guilty plea at his arraignment. His trial date has been set. He faces life in prison if convicted. Della's remains have not been recovered. The investigation into their location continues. There is a question that lives inside stories like this one, and it does not have a clean answer. It is the question of what those 38 years cost. Not in the abstract, but specifically. The nursing program Della never attended. The life her mother lived under the weight of not knowing. The decades Marisol spent watching a man who may have killed her sister walk freely through the same town where she raised her children. The people who knew something and stayed silent, for reasons that were real and human and rooted in systems much larger than any single decision. Those 38 years were not inevitable. They were the product of choices. Institutional choices, community choices, choices about whose loss was treated as urgent and whose was filed away. That is the part of this story that does not resolve when the handcuffs click. It is the part that stays. Della Reyes was 22 years old. She saved her tips in a jar. She had a color picked out for her dorm room. She had a whole life arranged in front of her, and was just beginning to step into it. She deserved better than 38 years. Say her name. It matters that you know it.